Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a little 6-game slate for college basketball. I found 6 guards and 4 forwards for you today, including a bonus play that's based on an injury situation. So with that said, this slate looks really good. All the games are really heavily tight, and then 4 of the games, with the exception of the Air Force and Dayton game, are all over 140 points in their totals. So we'll have to wait and see about this particular injury. I'm going to talk about that first here. For the New Mexico team here, that Jalen House is questionable. He is a game time decision today. If he were to miss, Javante Johnson rather, and Jamal Mashburn Jr. would get boosts. Johnson would get the biggest boost and would become a great value play. He's actually a decent value play today. He just missed the cut from that perspective, from a value aspect. But if he was to if House was to miss, he would become a must-play probably. He's been really good this season, and the 2 games that House missed, which were the last 2, scoring over 24 fantasy points in both those games. So his price is pretty good for that situation if House were to miss. But again, he is a game-time decision, and this is the late game on the slate, so that does have, if you want to take a risk, then you could definitely do that. But House, like I said, is a game-time decision, and I believe he has a hamstring injury. So we'll have to wait and see. But he has missed the last 2 games. With that said, this slate looks really good. Seems like there's pretty good value as well. So we're going to start with Jordan Dingle for Pennsylvania at $9,000. He's the most expensive player, I think, that's useful here. He is a little bit overpriced as well, but he has some decent upside, and he's had 9 straight games over 29 fantasy points. Obviously, he needs 45 to 5x, but of course it's college basketball, so we don't have to worry about him getting that many points, but we still need to get into the mid-30s, which he has tendency to get to. His ceiling isn't that much higher, though. He tends to hit right around those mid-30s most of the time, and he has for a while, 9 straight games over 29 points, but 21 fantasy points rather. But he does have some nice upside, but he is pretty scoring dependent. He doesn't get a lot of assists. He does get some rebounds, though. For a guard, he does pretty good at that aspect. But he's not a big assist guy, so he is scoring dependent, and he is a little bit risky to do that at his price point. Then we're going to look at Omari Moore at $8,200. He's my second favorite guard here on the slate. He has some really good upside. He has 50 fantasy point upside, which is really good for a guy that's $8,200. He has had some really big games lately, over 50 fantasy points as well. He has 4 straight games over 33 fantasy points against New Mexico, who he plays today, and he's literally probably the top tier play on the slate. I do think he's a core play today at this price and at this in this situation. He just looks like he's fairly priced and has really nice upside. He has just as much. He's been playing just as well as Dingle has, and he's $800 cheaper, and he has more upside. So I think he's a great play on the slate. Then we're going to look at Javion McCollum, and he's my first under 7,000 player at the guard position. He has battled some injuries this season. His price is solid for his high ceiling because he has 35 to 40 fantasy point ceiling. He can 5 or 6x if he plays over 30 minutes, which he does play over 30 minutes most of the time. But he's had four different parts of the season where he's missed a game or 2 due to injuries. So he's a little bit injury prone, and typically when he gets hurt, he doesn't do much in that game, obviously. So it really just, he is a little bit risky from that perspective. But he has a nice upside, and his price is pretty good. And so I do think he's a viable option on this slate. Then we're going to look at Ben let's see, Big. I don't know how to say your name. I'm sorry. Bez. Sorry. I miswrote down as Ben. Anyhow, he's played really solid this season. He's had 10 straight games over 19 fantasy points. And that's pretty solid considering the fact he's just under $6,000. He's a pretty safe play here. He doesn't really have a high ceiling, but he doesn't have a very low floor either. He tends to play right into that 20 fantasy point range. 20 to 25 range is probably where he gets most games. And he does get some assists and rebounds, which are nice as well, so he's not completely scoring dependent. So I do think he's a great, decent play on the slate. Then we're going to look at Michael Ealy for Siena. Now, this is one of my first of 2 value plays for the guard position. He comes off the bench, but he does play pretty well. Most game he plays over 20 minutes, and he has double-digit scoring potential. He does have a low floor, though. He's been a little bit inconsistent throughout the season, but he is priced low enough that you can take a little bit of a risk on him in order to pay up for some other guys. He has a decent ceiling as well. He has had some games where he scored 30 fantasy points, so he does look like a decent play today. And then we're going to look at August Mahoney. Sorry. Now he's kind of in a similar situation to Ely. He's got a pretty good ceiling, but he's got a low floor. But he is price cheap. He's a pump play, and if you just want to pay up for some other guys, then he's the one way to do it. I do think there's a lot of good guards available today, so I don't necessarily feel that confident in throwing out some cheap forwards. But so I think that some of the value plays for guard are probably more useful. But he does have some decent upside here at this price point at $4,400. And keep in mind, he's on a team that is projected to win, so that also helps. Then we're going to look at our forwards, and we're going to start with Udeze for New Mexico. Now, he feels like a must-play almost, though he did have one bad game against Air Force last game out, 2 games ago, but he has priced pretty good. He hasn't been as consistent as some of the expensive players on the slate that I've already talked about, but he does have double-double potential, and forward is kind of riskier today, and so he has some nice upside as a result of his, the way he plays. He does get double-doubles a lot, and he's probably the only guy on the slate that I'm mentioning that really has that potential. So I do think he's a great option today. He also has destroyed San Jose State the last game he played with 17 points and 14 rebounds. And so I expect him, if he can do something similar to that, he'll pay off nicely here. Then we're going to look at Matt Noling for Yale. And at $6,800, he seems like he's really solid. He has his worst game against Penn 5 games ago. But other than that, he's been over 19 fantasy points in every game this season, with the exception of one that was super early in the year. And that bodes for a really good opportunity here. He has really good upside as well. Like I said, his floor is pretty much what he did against Pennsylvania last game, which was 11 points. But he has been shooting really well and scoring the ball. He also gets some rebound stuff, which he didn't do in that Penn game. He also didn't play as many minutes that game, so not from fouls either. So I'm not sure exactly what the deal with that is. But overall, he's been really solid throughout the entire season. So I feel like that might just be an anomaly, and I think he's somebody who's worth taking a chance on at $6,800. Not too expensive, especially with forward being kind of weak today. Then we're going to look at Brandon Noel for Wright State. He has just $6,300, which is actually a little bit cheaper than I expected him to be. I actually thought he was going to be closer to $7,000 or maybe even $7,500 today. So he just seems like a really cheap option. He's been playing really well lately. This is also the highest scoring game on the slate. He's one of my favorite options at forward today. He started the season kind of coming off the bench and not playing all that great, but as the season progressed, he's built into a solid starter and a guy that's just doing really solid. He's averaging 12 and 8 throughout the season. He doesn't get double-doubles all that much, but he does have that potential, like Udeze does. So he does seem like a core play on this particular slate, and one of my favorite plays. He's my favorite overall play on the slate for when it comes to over $6,000 plays. And then finally, last but not least, we're going to get to my favorite value play here, and that's Tay Williams for Cleveland State. Now, Cleveland State is projected to have the highest scoring game on the slate, and they are expected to win as well. And he's my favorite play because he does start and he plays over 30 minutes most of the time. And he's priced at $3,600. I have no idea why he's priced this. He's had, I don't think it's been a while since he's had a sub 18 fantasy point game, which was, I guess, against Robert Morris in December. He had a couple of games early in the season that weren't that great, but he's been over 20 fantasy points a lot. He just seems like a clear must-play on the slate. The benefit of him, too, is he can play at guard or forward or utility on the slate more than most anybody else. He seems like a lock as well, so I do have 3 locks here with those 3. But with him being able to be playing guard or forward, you can utilize him in any way you want, and he's cheap, and he's by far the best value play on this slate. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. And otherwise, have a nice day, guys.